Light on the Truth, Revelation, with a commentary. Who? Introduction. Life in the world consists of two stages or paths, namely that of pravritti or going forth into the labyrinth of selfishness, getting more and more entangled in worldliness, thereby having to suffer chronic misery instead of the longed for happiness, and that of nivritti or returning to one's home in God, the source of one's being, thereby becoming reintegrated to Him, which is the essence of what is loosely called deliverance from bondage. In the former, the souls are unaware of the truth, namely that the self is one with God, the impersonal being, whom the sacred lore describes succinctly as Satchit Ananda, reality, consciousness, bliss, and hence is perfect, without wants. This idea of separateness is the root of all evil and of all sorrow, as it involves privation of the happiness which is the very nature of the self, because of the identity of the self with that impersonal, all-comprehending being called God. To fill up the void thus caused, the soul seeks pleasure from sense objects in the world outside. These pleasures seem to him to be the substance of happiness, which is not true because happiness, being the very nature of the real self, is uncaused and therefore does not need to be sought. Whosoever has access to this happiness in any degree is in that degree free from the fascination of pleasure-giving objects. Indeed, the Bhagavan tells us that even worldly pleasures are pleasures only because of the access to that inner source of happiness, which is momentarily obtained when a desire is fulfilled. Hence, the pursuit of happiness in the world outside is a mistake, and a very serious one, which results in more and more privation of true happiness. This growing privation aggravates the craving for worldly pleasures. A further consequence is that these pleasures become less and less satisfying, so that the misery that is due to separation from one's source, namely God, becomes chronic and unbearable. It is at this stage that a few souls, by God's grace, become aware that this quest of happiness in the outside world is a mistake. Guided by that, the same grace, they take to the path of nivritti, which ultimately leads to the attainment of the natural state, the true state of the self, commonly known as deliverance from ignorance and bondage. This is the end of the separation from God, the root cause of all evils. Naturally, the aspirant, when taking to this path, needs a guide, a guru, and the only proper guru is the one that has himself reached that state and abides in it all the time without intermission. Such a one is called a Jivan Mukta, which means one who, even during life, is ever in the natural state called Sahaja Samadhi. Such a one was Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. This holy text, Ulladu Narpadu, the original of which is in Tamil, is the most important of all the written teachings of the Bhagavan, our Sadguru. Before composing this text, the Bhagavan imparted the same teaching to a devotee disciple named Shivaprakasham Pillai, which appears in print under the title Who Am I?, which would serve as an introduction to the study of this revelation. The Bhagavan has also composed prior to this one a short book of teachings in Tamil called Upadesha Undiyar, which may also be studied by way of preparation for a study of this revelation. A free translation of the latter is given in an appendix to this introduction. The Master, while wholly approving of all the paths followed by the aspirants, tells us that these are not direct paths to the goal. He gives the reason in one of the verses in the supplement, Anubandha, namely that in these other paths the aspirant starts with an assumption that is not true, namely that the real self is just identical with the so-called soul, which is indistinguishable from the ego and is hence subject to limitations or defects which need to be removed by suitable efforts, whereas in fact the real self, being just the basic reality, consciousness bliss, is free from all imperfections. In the direct path as taught by him, no assumptions are made about the self, and so no self-created obstacles exist which have to be overcome. All that is needed is to become aware of the self as he is, and for this the direct path is the quest of the self, the source wherefrom the I sense arises. By fixing the mind on one of the two questions, who am I or whence am I? In the Chandogya Upanishad, this direct path is very briefly indicated by one very short sentence. He has to be sought by the resolve to become aware of him. Even in that place, the technique is not explained, nor it is even mentioned clearly in any of the commentaries or independent textbooks, prakaranas, which are extant. Hence, we may say that Bhagavan's teachings on this point is unique. There is another point on which Bhagavan's teaching is much clearer than any other source, namely in the distinction between the Sahaja Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the natural state free from thoughts, and the yogic Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, in which also there are no thoughts. The former alone is the state of deliverance, not the latter, because in the latter the mind is not dead, but remains latent, so that it could revive again, as explained in verse 13 of the shorter revelation, the Upadesha Undiyar. The substance of the Bhagavan's teaching, which is otherwise exactly the same as that of his predecessor, Bhagavatpada Sri Shankaracharya, is summarized below. All the ills of the worldly life are the outcome of the primary ignorance by which the body, composed of the 5 sheaths, is identified with the self, so that all defects and limitations of the former are transferred to the latter. This is improper because the self is pure spirit, consciousness, not only distinct from these sheaths, but also quite unconnected with them, that the self is therefore timeless and spaceless, the transcendental reality, which is also the substratum of the world appearance, which is not real in its own right, but only because it has the reality for its substratum, which alone is real in its own right. The self, therefore, is ever free and perfect, and does not need to be freed or perfected. By following the direct path, the mind, the agent of ignorance, is dissolved in the self and bondage, and all the ills of life are transcended, and the self is realized as pure consciousness bliss, without wants and without limitations. Obstacles to the successful pursuit of the quest consist in thoughts going out to the world in various ways. These thoughts are rooted in the long-cherished, deep-rooted belief that the body and the world are real in their own right. To still the mind and engage it in the quest, it is necessary to prevent these thoughts from arising at all. And this can be done only by substituting for the above false belief the opposite belief that the world as a whole and in all parts is not real in its own right and is therefore an obstacle to the quest. Thus forms distinctions time, space, fate with its opposite, free will and the individual soul are taken up one by one and shown to be unreal. Thereafter, the technique of the quest is explained in 3 verses 27 to 29. The remaining verses of the revelation give some teaching concerning the natural state, not with a view to giving a positive description of it, but to remove misconceptions about it that have prevailed among the various schools of Vedanta. The supplement clarifies a number of points which are mostly of practical value. The very last original composition of Bhagavan, the Ekatma Panchankam, comes as the crown of his teachings, suitable for fully ripe disciples. Therein, it is pointed out that both bondage and deliverance are equally unreal, that the self, being the reality, shining by his own light of consciousness, is ever free, so that even the direct path is ridiculous from the highest possible standpoint, that the self is not in the body, because it is the latter that is fictitiously created in the self, and that what is needed is just to cease to cherish the ignorance, I am the body. This teaching, it would seem, is intended to unfold the secret of the teaching by silence given by God Himself as Dakshinamurti to the 4 sages Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanat Sujata and Sanat Kumara, the mind-born sons of the Creator who wanted the perfect peace of the self. Appendix to the introduction. The essence of teaching. Translation of the Tamil text, the Upadesha Undiyar. This translation will serve also as a translation of the Sanskrit version of this revelation, the Upadesha Sara, also composed by Bhagavan. 1. It is by God's will that actions yield their fruit. Actions aren't God, because they are insentient. This is a proof that God exists. 2. The fruits of actions, when they are spent, assuming a seed form, immerse the soul in an ocean of actions. They do not lead to deliverance. 3. But actions done without desire, as service to God, purify the mind and thus show it the way to the goal. 4. This is clear, namely that worship, japa and meditation, which are activities of the body, speech and mind respectively, are excellent in the order named. Actions of the body are of the least value. Those of speech are more profitable, while meditation, being mental, is of the highest value. Japa is continuous repetition of a name or sentence. 5. Service to God, remembering that all the 8 world categories are His forms, is the most excellent worship of God. That is, whatever service is rendered to any creature is worship of God, if it be remembered that the whole world, enumerated in the 8 forms, is His cosmic form. 6. Superior to loud praise of God and to inaudible japa is the purely mental process of meditation. 7. Uninterrupted meditation, resembling the flow of water or of ghee, is superior to that which is discontinuous. 8. Superior to the meditation with sense of difference is that done with the conviction of non-difference in the form of I am He. 9. Abiding in the true state, which is beyond meditation, as the result of the steady and persistent practice of meditation, is the truth of supreme devotion, love of God. During sadhana, devotion and the pursuit of true knowledge are different, but they lead to the same goal, which is both supreme devotion and perfect knowing. 10. Remaining still in one's own source, the reality which is God, is itself perfect action, devotion, mind control, and right awareness. This is expressed in greater detail in the 14th verse of the supplement to the light on the truth. 11. The mind is settled when the breath is stilled by pranayama, like a bird caught in a net. So, this is a method of stilling the mind. 12. For mind, whose function is sensation, and life, whose function is action, are two branches growing from one root, consciousness. 13. Quiescence of the mind is of two kinds, namely latency and final dissolution. This needs to be understood because the mind that is latent would revive, but that which is once for all dissolved into the self will not rise anymore. The importance of this distinction is that it is the complete dissolution of the mind which leads to the natural state, not the latency. 14. If after stilling the mind by stilling the breath, the mind be fixed on one point, then the mind would be dissolved and the mindless state would be reached. 15. The great yogi who has attained the true state by the dissolution of the mind has no need to do any action, because he has recovered his own true nature as the real self, who is actionless. 16. Right awareness of the self is just the mind becoming aware of its own true nature as pure consciousness, as the result of the mind being disentangled from attachment to outside objects. 17. If the truth of the mind be persistently investigated, keeping it away from all outside objects, in the end there will be no mind left. This is the direct path which is available to one and all. The process is explained in the succeeding verses. 18. The mind is nothing but a series of thoughts. Of all the thoughts, the root is the I thought. Hence, the I, the ego, is the mind. The next step is unfolded in the next verse. 19. When the source wherefrom the ego arises is sought, the ego perishes. This is the method of inquiry, vichara, leading to right awareness of the real self. 20. When thus the ego perishes, another I, not as an object of thought, will shine of itself in the form of I. That I is the all, the fullness of truth. This is amplified in verse 30 of the first part of the light on the truth. 21. That is the true meaning of the term I, not the ego, because we do not cease to be in deep, dreamless sleep wherein the ego is absent. 22. The real I is not the body, nor the sense organs, nor life, nor the mind, nor the darkness, ignorance, because all these are insentient and unreal. 23. Since consciousness by which the truth is known is not other than the reality, the truth itself is consciousness. Therefore, we are consciousness. This makes it clear that there is only one entity which is both truth, reality, and consciousness. 24. Because God and the soul are both of the same nature, as reality they are one and the same. Difference is only apparent due to the difference in the vehicles, sheaths, and the degree of awareness. God is consciousness with Maya, the creative power, for his vehicle, while the soul has avidya, ignorance, for his vehicle. The characteristic feature of God is infinite awareness. The awareness of the soul is limited. 25. Becoming aware of oneself apart from the vehicle, the 5 sheaths making up the body, is itself rightly knowing God, because it is He that shines in the heart as the self. 26. Knowing one's self is just being the self, because the self is not twofold. This is the state of identity with the truth, the true state. The self being only one and also being the eternal subject can never become an object of knowledge. Hence, the expression knowing oneself is not to be taken in a literal sense. 27. Right awareness is that in which there is neither knowledge nor ignorance, because in the state called right awareness, there is no object to be known. That is, there is no dvaita, duality. 28. When awareness of the real self has been won, what remains is the beginningless, endless truth which is consciousness bliss, whereby it is made clear that the self has the 3 aspects, the truth, consciousness and bliss. Hence, attaining awareness of the self is the attainment of perfection and of bliss. 29. What is described as acting as an instrument of God's will is just the remaining in the state of supreme bliss, where there is neither bondage nor deliverance. This verse has reference to a verse in the Shivanyana Bodham, a Saivite text, wherein it is said that the freed soul has no actions of his own, but is tavadhina svavrittik, that is, acts as prompted by God's will. It is here affirmed that it is in the true state, the natural state of the self, that this happens, because the sage, the knower of the self, is mindless. He is called a Jivan Mukta. He has no actions because his ego has been lost once and forever, but others see him acting. These actions are to be understood by us as actions of God directly operating the vehicles without the intervention of personal volition. In the Sanskrit version, the meaning conveyed by the word Daivika, which must be interpreted as meaning one whose actions are God's actions. This explanation was given by Bhagavan. 30. The Lord Ramana, who is the real self of all creatures, says that abiding in the egoless state is itself the best tapas. Tapas is effort towards purification of the mind as a condition for reaching the goal. Such tapas is indispensable for those that have yet to attain the natural state, which is egoless. For him that has won the state, tapas is unnecessary. But by merely abiding in that state, he gets all the good results of tapas. Hence, being the self is here described as the highest tapas. This is not for his benefit, but for that of his devotees. Note: this crisp summary of the different grades of sadhana suitable at different stages on the path of nivritti shows that fitness for taking to the direct path is to be acquired by evolution through a long series of lives in which sadhana of the previous stages are gone through with zeal for the attainment of the goal, whether rightly or wrongly conceived. The first stage is selfless, disciplined action, which has the germs of devotion in it. The second stage is devotion culminating in meditation, which leads to samadhi either automatically or through deliberate practice of the quest. The third stage is the quest, which is the direct path. The goal is the recovery of one's own true nature as the real self, transcending the world. Archives of Sri Ramanachramam. Om Shri Ramanarpanamastu. Holding on the vision of the Absolute, abandoning all objects of contemplation, abiding in your own self, and liberated even while alive, play in the world, O Raghava. Outwardly active but inwardly inactive, outwardly a doer but inwardly a non-doer, play in the world, O Raghava. Conducting yourself nobly and strictly, keeping to the worldly conventions, but inwardly free and completely detached, play in the world, O Raghava. Selections from Yoga Vasishta by Bhagavan Sri Ramana.